G'day guys, in today's video we're going to show you how to perform a basic service on this 2007 Subaru Outback with the 2.5 litre 4-cylinder non-turbo petrol engine. So that's going to involve changing the engine oil, oil filter and air filter. Now this video is going to apply to all 2003 to 2009 Outbacks as well as the Liberty and Legacy models with that same EJ253 petrol engine. So let's jump right in. We'll just quickly run through all the tools and parts that you're going to need to do the job today, but we'll put a full list down in the description below. First up, we've got some nitrile gloves and some safety glasses for protection. Then we've got an oil drain pan with a minimum capacity of 4 litres and some paper towel or some rags to clean up any mess. Then we've got a flathead and a Phillips head screwdriver and a socket wrench with 12mm and 17mm sockets and an extension. Then we've got an oil filter cup wrench. Now you can get a couple of different styles of oil filter wrench, but because of the location of the oil filter on this particular car, you are going to want that style, and this is a Ryco RST202 part. Then we've got a torque wrench for doing up our drain plug to the appropriate setting, and a funnel for installing our new engine oil. As for the parts that we're going to be installing today, we've gone for genuine Subaru. First up, we've got the new air filter, and then we've got a new crush gasket for when we reinstate our drain plug, and then a new engine oil filter. Lastly, for the engine oil that we're going to be installing today, you're going to need 4 litres of oil, and the way that you tell which oil you're going to need is you turn to your owner's manual and it will specify multiple oil viscosities with 5W30 being preferred. But today we're going to be using a 10W30 oil due to the high mileage and climate conditions for this particular vehicle. Just before we get started, we've taken the car for a quick 10 or 15 minute drive to get it up to operating temperature because that warm oil will drain out a bit more easily. Next, we've chocked the back wheels with some bricks just to make sure the car can't move anywhere, and we've actually chosen to drive it up onto some blocks at the front as well because that's going to give us a little bit more room to work with underneath, but it's not essential that you do that. And then lastly, before we drain the engine oil, we're just going to remove that oil filler cap because that's going to help the oil to drain out more smoothly. And you can just leave that cap on top loosely just so that nothing can get in there. So up underneath the front of the car now, and the first thing we need to do is to remove this factory bash plate just so we can get to everything. And that's held on by 3 12mm screws. You've got 2 at the front, 1 here and 1 here, and then 1 in the center at the back of the bash plate. So we're going to start with that back one just because it makes it a bit easier to remove. So this is the screw here. Just take your 12mm socket on the socket wrench and we're going to loosen that one off. And once it's loose, you can take it the rest of the way by hand. And then just put that screw aside because we're going to need to put that back in later. Next, we're going to remove the 2 front 12mm screws. And once they're all loose, you should be able to just drop that bash plate to the ground, and we're just going to put that out of the way so that we can put it back on later. So that gives us access to the engine oil sump, which is in the center of the car just forward of the 2 front wheels. And this is our drain plug that we're going to remove to drain the oil. So you want to take a 17mm socket on the socket wrench, and we're just going to crack that plug just slightly for now because we haven't put the drain pan underneath yet. So once that's cracked, you want to take your drain pan and position it underneath that plug. Once it's finger tight, you want to remove it the rest of the way by hand. You want to be fairly quick when you do this so that you don't drop it in the engine oil or pour oil all over your hand. Now you want to be careful as well because the oil that's going to come out is going to be hot. Now you want to hang on to that drain plug because we're going to reuse that later. Alright, so while we wait for that engine oil to drain, we're just going to complete the rest of the service items. And the first one is to change the air filter, which is located inside the air box on the driver's side of the vehicle. So take your flathead screwdriver and we're just going to loosen off this hose clamp here. Once that's finger tight, we're going to remove this little wiring clip here. Now, the way that we remove this is just to pinch it together, so just push down on that lever there and then wiggle it out. Make sure you're not pulling by the wires, just pull by the clip itself. And then you can remove that from the hose and just pop that off to the side and out of the way. And then lastly, we just need to remove the 2 clips that hold the airbox lid on. Now that everything's loose, you can just pull this air cleaner hose off of that section and just pop that to the side. And then we can open up our airbox just enough to get our air filter out. So that's your old air filter in there. So you want to just grab that out. And there's our new air filter for comparison, so you can see that that one's pretty dirty. So you can throw that away. Before we put the new air filter in, it's a good idea to give the airbox a quick clean. For example, you can wipe out inside with a rag, or even better, you can attach a short length of flexible plastic tube to the end of a vacuum cleaner, and you can pop it down in there just to pick up any dust or dirt that may have made its way into the airbox. Grab the new air filter, and we're going to have it so that the smaller recessed side is facing towards the front of the car, and we've got these ribs laying horizontally. So pop that down into the airbox. And you want to just press it in, you should just feel it pop into place. And then you can close up your airbox lid. Latch those two clips down. Then you can take your air cleaner hose and pop that back on. And grab your flathead screwdriver and we can just do up that hose clamp. Once that hose clamp's secure, the last thing to do is just to take that electrical plug and we're going to push that back on, and you should hear a little click once it engages. And that's it. That's all there is to changing the air filter. So back underneath the front of the car now, and we're just going to remove our oil filter, which is located next to the engine oil sump, which is over here. The oil filter is up inside this exhaust section here, so I'm just touching it with my finger now. We've repositioned our drain pan underneath that oil filter. I'm going to take our oil filter cup socket on the extension on the socket wrench and just loosen that oil filter. So you want to push the oil filter cup socket up on the oil filter and just make sure it's engaged, and then you just want to loosen that oil filter. And you want to be careful when you do this because the oil filter is upside down. It is going to drain out some oil as soon as it starts to get loose. So I can feel now that that's finger tight. So I'm going to remove the socket and I'm going to take it the rest of the way by hand. So once you've got it a bit loose, you can let a little bit of oil drain out so that you don't get it all over yourself. And then once most of the oil is drained, you can just remove it by hand. And then you can just drain the oil out of the filter into your drain pan. You can throw that oil filter away because we're going to be installing a new one. So once the oil filter is removed, you just want to take some paper towel or a rag and just clean up around the thread here that the new oil filter is going to screw onto. You also want to clean off any oil that might have got on the exhaust because otherwise that'll burn when the car starts. So before we install the new oil filter, we're just going to remove the plastic cover that's on there. And then we need to pre-lubricate the rubber seal around the end of that filter. So take your new engine oil can and with a clean glove, poke your finger into that new engine oil and we're just going to run it around the edge of that seal just to pre-lubricate the surface because we don't want to have dry rubber when we're screwing it up. So pop your oil filter inside your cup socket and you'll see that on the inside of the oil filter there's a female thread and that's going to tighten up onto the male thread coming down from above. So you just want to turn that in a clockwise direction. So I can feel that's just contacting now. And then on this particular oil filter, you can tighten it to 1 full turn or 10 foot-pounds, which is 14 Newton meters. So we're going to use the arrow that's on the cup filter socket itself and just go for 1 full rotation past that first contact point. So there we go, that's 1 full rotation, so that's finished. So just before we reinstate our sump plug, you just want to check whether the old gasket is stuck onto the plug or the bottom of the sump. In this case, you can see it's stuck onto the plug. In order to take that off, you just want to take a flathead screwdriver or something with a thin blade on it and just pop that in between the gasket and the end of the plug, and it should come away like that and just run it around the edge. And you just want to remove that old gasket because you always want to use a new one. So then you can take your new crush gasket and pop it over the plug, and then we're ready to put that back on. Next, we're going to take some paper towel or a rag and we're just going to wipe around the sump where the plug's going to go. Then you want to take your plug with the new gasket on it and we're just going to tighten that up by hand. Then we're going to take our 17mm socket on the torque wrench and we're going to do this one up to 33 foot-pounds, which is 44 Newton meters. You might find it takes a few turns on this one because it'll want to crush the gasket initially. And that's it. So the last thing to do underneath the car is just to reinstate the bash plate that we removed earlier with the 3 12mm screws. I'm going to start with the 2 longer screws that go up at the front. just pop your bash plate up into position and just offer up the first of those 2 screws by hand. And then we're going to do that up the rest of the way with the 12mm socket on the socket wrench. Don't do that too tight for now, we'll put the next screw in first before we tighten them all up. Once they're both in position, you can just tighten them down with that socket. We're not going to use a particular torque setting for these, just do them good and tight. And then lastly, we just need to install that shorter 12mm screw in the center at the back. And again, we're just going to do that up with the 12mm socket, good and tight. And that's it for underneath the car. Up in the engine bay now, and the next step is just to put our new engine oil in. So we're going to remove the engine oil filler cap, which is located just next to your dipstick. So just take that off and put it off to the side. Then you can pop your funnel in. Again, we need to put in 4 litres of the new engine oil. And the way that you tell is you look at the markings on the side of the can, which are in 500ml increments. When you pour the new oil in, you want to hold the can on its side, because that'll stop it from glugging. So I can tell I'm finished because there's about 1 litre left in that 5 litre can. Then you can grab some paper towel and just clean up the funnel. And then just put your engine oil filler cap back on and do it up in a clockwise direction. Now we're going to wait 5 or 10 minutes just to let the oil settle down into the engine, and then we're just going to dip it to verify that it's at the right level. So to dip the oil, you just want to pull that stick out, wipe it off on some paper towel or a rag, and then pop it back in, then pull it out. So you just want to see whether the oil level sits between this hole here and this hole here, which is your low and full levels. And in this case, I can see it's just sitting around the full level, which is what we want. And that's it, guys. That's all there is to performing the basic service. A great way of saving yourself some money and making sure your Subi runs smoothly. We're always looking to improve, so if you've got any feedback for us or something you'd like to see in a future video, please let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video. Yeah! Dream team out. All right. Good sesh.